Hey, welcome to the show. I'm here today with Mark Bowers, retired out of the Navy and runs the nonprofit Troubleshooter, and also is the founder of the Professional Development Consortium of Hampton Roads. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm doing outstanding. I appreciate you asking. Little overcast outside, but what does the outside mean to us over this last year?
Yeah, if you can steal away for some time and go out and see the nice landscape and the nice weather and get out and explore a little bit, that's great. I know Virginia is still on lockdown. I've been in Oklahoma and we've been open for months and months and months. Most of the Midwest is wide open, but those people on the coast are not interested in opening up just yet. But I'm not the expert on any of those things.
Right.
We're going to talk today a little bit about how to know if what you're doing is making a difference. How do you know that your nonprofit is making that impact, is having measurable performance, and knows anything about what's going on? But before we get into that, why don't you give us a little bit of background on who you are and the nonprofit troubleshooter?
Sure thing. So I'll reach back just a little bit. I grew up, and I use that term loosely, but I grew up in a household of do-gooders, and I didn't really appreciate or know it at the time. But my folks founded a volunteer ambulance corps for the small city where I grew up. They led a Lions Club and a Lioness Club because we used to differentiate back then. So that was something I was surrounded with. Then I went off to college. Then I went off after that and joined the Navy, submarine officer. So I was kind of removed from that do-gooder. As a matter of fact, in the Department of Defense, doing good is part of it, but not necessarily all of it. Sometimes we're doing harm in a meaningful, purposeful way. So, anyways, I completed my Navy service, did another 10 years or so in that traditional post-military role of I'm going to go keep doing the same thing, but I just won't wear a uniform. And after about 10 years of that consulting through management firms, management consulting firms, 10 years was about enough. And so I left that last company and declared myself to be a consultant. And then I thought I'd figure out what that meant afterwards. So after about a year of doing SFM consulting, and for your audience who's scratching their heads right now, that stands for stuff for money, right? So I was like, sure, I can do that. I wound up with the opportunity to work here in Virginia Beach with the city government, Department of Human Resources, specifically Child Protective Services, their investigative unit. So these are the frontline people out there dealing with kids who are, well, to shorthand it, are in immediate danger and in a very unstable family situation. And I didn't know anything about that. I was detailed over there, as it were, to help with, of all things, an IT and information technology issue. But it's the proverbial pulling a string on a sweater or the tip of the iceberg, pick your analogy. You started discovering, started a conversation about, well, why is this problematic? For me, it was, simply it's like, well, how do I know how to resource the IT people who are going to address this, or how to prioritize their resources? And then you pull that string and it just completely unraveled that sweater about a lot of challenges in the organization, of which this IT thing just exposed a problem. It wasn't really a problem. Nobody cares that a printer was busted or whatever, but it just revealed a lot of challenges in the organization. The investigators, and this is a few years ago, so I'm not putting anybody right there on report. The investigators were challenged to get out and spend time with the families where they were needed to be. That's kind of the bottom line. Stuck doing a lot of admin, we're clearing backlog. Some were just leaving for similar, same job in a different city, even for lower pay, just so they could be out there with the families, with the kids. And after 30 years in the adult workforce, all of a sudden, all of that stuff I grew up with just came back to me. And I said, oh my gosh, I know exactly where I am now. For the first time, I'm in my passion area and I didn't even know what it was. Turns out I like helping do-gooders do more good. So I don't know anything. Well, I didn't know anything at all about what does it mean to be a child protective services investigator. But I do know what it means to, try and help others. So I found myself, as I was kind of reflecting on the work I did with them, thinking, what did I really, really like about this? When I was in the military, especially near the end of my career, I was very far removed from the average person on the street. I used to say, I don't think that what I do today is very substantial by the time it reaches my mom or my sister, right? It was very dilute at that point. And I wanted to be closer to the action, but not necessarily in the action. And it kind of came to clarity working with the Child Protective Services folks to say, I've finally found something where I'm good at it. It's stuff I want to do. It's stuff I can do. And I'm getting rewarded for it. And that's to help the organization that's right on the front line, help them do better. So it might have been useful for the city if I had gone through Child Protective Service investigator training and say, I will come here and do this for you, and I will volunteer or whatever. But I felt it's more useful to say, no, I've helped 24 people get their stuff done. That feels pretty good. I'm pretty close to the action. And then I can go elsewhere and say, what did I learn from that, and apply everywhere else. So that's what finally took me off that stuff for money consulting and put me on I want to work in the mission directed world, generally nonprofit, but certainly nonprofit and certain sectors of local and state government, fit in there. And so, again, just as we all do, we accumulate lessons learned, from our actions and interactions. And that kind of led me to saying, all right, let me formalize this. Let me, go from a guy who's got a website to a guy who knows why he has that website and knows what he's trying to deliver into the world.
Absolutely. That's exciting stuff to get out of the government world and find your passion. That's what I'm working on doing myself. It sounds like a similar path with the Nonprofit Architect podcast and the services that I provide. But really today we're trying to figure out, how to know if you're making a difference. There's one thing to have a mission, and if you're in the nonprofit world, you have to have a mission, but no one really cares about the mission itself, right? You've got the mission to help veterans. They've got the mission to help veterans. There's 53,000 organizations in the U.S. right now dedicated to helping veterans. Like whoopity-doo, you're helping veterans. And I'm not saying that to be crass or anything like that. I'm saying that because wanting to help veterans is as common as everything else. But how are you making an impact in that world? And that's what we're trying to figure out, how to define what that looks like, because the impact's really where the rubber meets the road and what actually is making the difference in lives.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. One of the things I talk about, back to your point about, hey, there's 53,000 veteran service organizations or whatever the number is. And each and every one of them, at their core, their mission statement or their founders, like, we help veterans, and maybe it says, we help veterans do something, which is lovely, which is, kind of a very casual or very deliberate word, rather. So it's lovely that you want to help veterans. And you can maybe even go a little bit further and say, I want to help veterans do this, or get this, or this is, I want to make sure they have homes. Again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with dealing with, unhomed veterans. For me, there's a couple of things that you got to consider. There's distinctiveness and sustainability are kind of like two of my keywords. You can find them on the back of my business card, even though under COVID, when's the last time I handed out a business card? Never. But sustainability and distinctiveness. So distinctiveness refers to an organization's degree of uniqueness. And for those of you who enjoy grammar, that concept of a degree of uniqueness is just horrible. I'm sorry about that. You're either unique or you're not. But distinctiveness is like, is there, is there absolutely nobody else doing this, or is it just a few people or a few other organizations, or is everybody around you doing this? So that's important from the practicality standpoint of, or point, I should say. So if you say I'm a organization interested in helping veterans, and you know that there's 52,999 other organizations just like that, what helps people support you in your effort? What makes you stand out to sponsors? What makes you stand out to potential volunteers? What makes you stand out to grant makers? How are you different? Well, one of the areas in which you can make a difference while you're making that plea for support is to say, and I know how I'm making a difference in our society, right? What is the impact I'm making or I can make through my efforts? So now we're taking it from I love veterans and I want to do stuff for veterans, to here's the model, here's the structure, here's the analysis, here's the theory of change, here's the logic model, here's all the pieces that go into making this particular subset of veterans, look at me, I'm narrowing it down, some particular population, making their life better. And this is how I know we make their life better, because we have measures in place that show that our results, or our activities rather, directly result in elevating the life of that population. Or we know that through funded research or academic research, that our efforts are among the things that are necessary to elevating the life of that population. And if we have an opportunity, maybe we'll dive into that a little bit more as we go through today. So and the other thing, of course, I mentioned was sustainability along with distinctiveness. If you're doing good stuff, it would be lovely to have you back next year and keep doing it. So that speaks more to mechanics of developing and executing on strategy, board development, marketing and stuff like that, the more mundane and probably least sexy part of it, but absolutely necessary to come back next year and continue serving whatever community it is you choose to work with.
Oh, absolutely. And, we said uniqueness and we've said distinct. How are you distinct? What we're really talking about is identifying a niche or a niche, depending on what part of the country has been said, how you pronounce that word. But like if you're talking about your organization, it's like, hey, do you know a veteran? And maybe you can think of a bunch. Hey, do you know of anyone that wants to help veterans get into a home? Well, then you start thinking of a more specific person. You're really defining that avatar. You're getting down to that niche. When I was on the board of and the vice president of Books by Vets, our mission was to help veterans and first responders heal through sharing their story. And how we did that was we helped them become published authors and share their stuff. One, you get that little feather in your cap that says you're a published author. Two, you find out that once you share your story, that not only you're not alone, but there's so many others suffering from the same types of things that you are. So it brings you back into the group, back into the fold, and helps others heal as well through understanding that other people are going through the same struggles. So I think we did a pretty good job nailing down that mission statement of who we help and how we plan on doing that. That gives us our target audience and what we're doing differently, that distinctiveness, that degree of uniqueness, as Mark says it, that really covers who it is that we're targeting and how we're different. And when you talk to, and I've talked to tons of nonprofit organizations, I talk to ones that can just spit it out and it makes sense. I've talked to others that they're trying to still kind of find the words to talk about what their mission statement is. And
Sure.
really understanding what the target population is that you're trying to help, and maybe put a spin on how or why or what you're doing, all on the same topic. And it doesn't have to be crazy, right? It doesn't have to be 3 lines long. I think like TED is spreading ideas. It's just 2 words, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be convoluted, but it has to make sense. It has to be easy for people to communicate, and they need to know in the mission statement, what is it that makes you unique? And that makes it a lot easier for people to identify people that might be able to help you with your mission or who might need your services.
Right. So yeah, and I think that's a wonderful example, and it actually opens the door for uh, measuring impact. So I can, and hopefully I've got all this, and you'll correct me if I misstate your details. Um, but what I heard in there is, so you have a set of inputs, right? There's publishing tools, authoring tools. There's connections into community. So there's stuff that goes into achieving your mission of turning some set of vets into published authors, with the idea that it's, like you said, feather in their cap. It's a bullet point on the resume, and probably the more significant one from a societal consequence is that degree of connectivity. So you're putting them with folks who can presumably receive and provide some value just simply through that connectedness, that common bond. So from so we mentioned some inputs, then you've got some activities you apply to them. I don't know specifically what they were, but there's probably a training, there's support, so on and so forth. How do you write, how do you publish, things like that you do in terms of education. Maybe there's, and we'll do your editing, and we've got graphics where I have no idea, but there's a bunch of activities. And then you have the outputs, which is that first degree, that first and theoretically easiest thing to measure is mostly counts of things. Like, we had this many veterans enter the program last year. We had this many actually publish a book, right? So you have these things that are underneath the management control of your organization that say, we directly, our fingerprints are all over this. We got these, this many books came out, and we can come up with all kinds of statistics. Well, the average page length per book, which is useless, but you could chart all kinds of good stuff at the output level, right? And then you go a little bit deeper. You say, well, and we can also gather some anecdotal things that are good to share, to help spread the word. We tell the story of her or of him or them, and how their life was affected by this. So for me, it's like, okay, now that we have that, now that we're on the brink of discovering how their life was better, we've added some things to them that are a little less tangible. It might be that connectivity. So for me, it's, what's the next two steps after that? So at the individual level, what are they able to do now? Now, how do we measure? Simply being connected is not a perfect measure of my life being better. What has that extra degree of connectedness done for you as the individual? It's like, something, if I hadn't gone through this path, if I hadn't done this and this, and you guys were part of it, and then the other thing, I would have not, found a connection to this great job. I finally have, the roof over my head, or, the steady income, or the sense of self-worth, whatever it is. So that's where you're starting to pull a little bit more out of it, and becomes less quantitative, less quantitative and more qualitative. It's anecdotal, but anecdotes are a perfectly valid form of data. And then, and here's where we're really pushing, for that impact assessment, is really, did we make a difference in the community? What does it mean that we've released, 40 authored, 40 vet authors, out into our community, maybe it's our neck of the woods or wherever it is. It's like, how does our society benefit from that? And quantitatively, probably a little hard. This we're like almost in the pure qualitative assessment, But it's still, like I said before, you can collect qualitative data, you can analyze it, you can report on it, you can make decisions based on it. It's in that whole rubric concept of measuring what matters. Just because it doesn't fit on a spreadsheet doesn't mean it's not worth gathering, analyzing, and doing something with, and using that as your own organization's feedback loop to say, we should definitely do more of this, or we should definitely stop doing, that other thing. So to me, that's the really exciting part, is exploring, this overall impact, that societal consequences, like another term for it. It's like, we've elevated the individual. How does that in turn elevate the community? And there's the rub. There's the hard part.
There's the hard part. With something like our projects that we did with Books by Vets, it was really easy to say that we've got 50 veterans that we've now turned into published authors. That's the easy part. The harder part, like the more qualitative things you're talking about, is really gathering that testimonial, that impact story. I know, especially in the veteran world, or if you talk about things like PTSD, it's hard to get permission. People want to give you the story, but they don't want you to use their name. And understandable, that's fine, right? There's a big difference between saying we feed 300 homeless people a week, very quantitative, easy number to pin on. Everything about it makes sense and is straightforward. It's easy to support something like that. It's much harder, especially in something like a veteran organization, an organization designated to serve veterans, to really get that quantitative data. Like, it's easy for us to say we helped 50 veterans become published authors. What's hard to get is that story. And you could say, former EMT or Army veteran, and you could say that and then share the story. And, some of the stories from our organization is, you have people that had guns in their mouth, or lived in a world of empty bottles or pills or injection needles. And after sharing their story for the first time and actually getting published off it, they had a reason to have that little piece of achievement, change their self-worth. This one individual went from a gun with a bullet with their name on it and empty bottles to becoming a public speaker and a head of another organization, impacting other lives. So you can take that story, you can take that qualitative piece, and there's so many organizations, especially veteran organizations, that are not doing this, that are not gathering the stories. Don't use their name. Say, hey, we got another Marine Corps veteran entering our services today. They're going to read this post. Give us some great information, some great tips, some positive words to help them on their journey. You don't have to say, Mark Bowers, retired sub officer, is now. You don't have to say that, right? You can just say, hey, we got a submarine officer, retired Navy, coming out, and he's done this, this, and this, and here's his story. That's perfectly okay. That's perfectly legitimate. And it helps you create that concrete structure that shows other people what it is that you're actually doing and what impact you're providing. But if you can't share the impact, if you don't have the quantitative numbers or the qualitative stories, what are you really doing, and how can you convince people to get on board if you don't have either of those things?
Right. And it goes back to what what you were originally saying, and what we were talking about in terms of that distinctiveness. The fact, even the simple act of being, or the capability and capacity of telling that story, or gathering a few of those anecdotes, are actually pretty critical for being distinctive. When we're all, we are, nonprofits are businesses compete. There's a book called Blue Ocean Strategy. It's been out for a very long time. It's actually released a second one a few years ago. But its concept is and it's got a commercial focus that says, go where everybody else ain't at, right? Talking about Cirque du Soleil. Cirque du Soleil is a circus. There's plenty of other circuses out there, but it is so distinctive that it's not really competing for traditional, let's go to the zoo, let's go to the circus dollars and stuff like that. So again, not only distinctiveness in what you do, but how you show yourself as an organization. And that, it honestly, it just speaks to credibility. It's like, it allows people, again, we're in competition with everybody else for resources. So, why should I give to your organization, the other organization? Well, let me tell you why, because your dollar your dollar, your $10, your $100, your $1,000 is going to help us tell more stories, success stories like this one about Mark, who, was sitting on a Mark 48 Tomahawk missile and, et cetera, et cetera. Actually, I just combined torpedoes with missiles. I apologize to everybody in the Navy for that. It's been a couple of days since I've been out.
There's always that person listening. Well, that's not how that works. You're like, come
That's
on.
right. No, right.
Let's sprinkle a little
so I'm going to
grace
depend on
this
your
and call
editing
it
skills
good.
to fix my blunder there. You don't really have to.
Definitely not going to edit this
that.
out. That's making it in there.
That's right. I see that all the time. You see it all the time in comedy specials. So, but yeah, it's so again, it goes back to, like I said, being distinctive. And another point, when you mentioned TEDx is, so you can't get to that distinctiveness, right, unless you truly know what your purpose is. And you spoke a little bit about that about books by vets. Pretty distinctive, pretty unique. Don't know of any other organization. Plenty of vet organizations. Don't know of anyone else that's focused on that authorship. So for me, as some random dude that you might be chatting to, at some point, I've got something there I can hold on to. That's special, right? Yeah. So for me to be some type of an advocate on behalf of your organization, I need something that'll really kind of stick out in my mind. So, it's like knowing really precisely what you do and what looks like success, or where I try to push organizations is to know what problem you're solving, what results you can achieve, what impact you're making, hint. That's the distinctive story that burrows into people's brains, and they say, I recognize now the opportunity for this. It's kind of like job hunting, right? If you have a whole bunch of people, if you've connected with 18,000 people on LinkedIn, and half of them will say, Travis is a good guy, that's nice, that probably won't get you a job. But knowing that Travis, is a, not so much what you were, but what you are now is like you're a troubleshooter, or you're a broadcaster, or you connect nonprofits with the audience that needs to hear what they do. Whatever it is that gives it that granularity and distinctiveness is what digs into my brain and say, I can now recognize opportunities where say, Travis is your man. You should definitely talk to this person, as opposed to the thousands and thousands of, hey, pretty good guy, pretty good gal, that I know and never come to the surface, because rarely do I find, a request for, I'm looking for a pretty good guy. Right? Right. At least not in the business sense.
Well, like you see it all the time, especially on social media. Hey, I'm looking for this person, this thing, this service, this whatever. So I had someone's like, hey, I'm trying to get my website rebuilt. It's a pain in my butt. Who do you know? And I'm like, a former guest, Jared Ledbetter, we talked about story branding. I'm like, get a hold of Jared. He crushes websites. It's going to be distinctive. He's going to crush the SEO for you, and he's going to meet ADA standards. Right. And people are like, oh, I know exactly where this guy's focus is, what his expertise is, and that he's trusted by someone in my network. Right. That's an easy no-brainer, as long as they can meet on the price point, that it makes sense. I've got the recommendation from someone I know and trust. I know exactly what they're all about, and I know how to get a hold of them. Like, you can't beat that. But if someone walks away from your conversation and they can't tell someone else what it is that you do or why you're special, then it doesn't matter if they have your business card in hand or not. I know we're not handing them out right now, but it doesn't matter. It's like you might as well have never had the conversation in the first place.
Right. So that's like one of my favorite things to do when I meet somebody and we have the, that quick conversation. What do you do? What do you care about? So on and so forth. Is the next time I see them or I'm in contact with them, is to ask them, so it's been a while. What do you think it is I do? What do you think my organization does? And, I don't expect them to get it 100%, A solid 70 is a passing grade. And if they fail, it's not their failure. It's completely my failure.
Right.
I didn't tell you anything particularly distinctive that burrowed itself into your head that that your body is now prepped to retain and retrieve. Right. It was like, so I apologize for wasting your time, and let me take this lesson learned and continue to boil it down. I mean, it's and I'm by no means perfect at it, but when I'm doing my nonprofit troubleshooting work, as it were, we spend almost every single engagement, regardless of the intended purpose of it, always starts out with, forgive the pun, with working on their purpose statement. It is the item from which all decisions, all marketing, all board recruitment, all sponsor requests, all grant requests, all volunteer solicitations, all flow from that purpose statement. And call it mission statement, call it vision statement, call it FRED, it doesn't really matter. But that tight definition of knowing who you help, why you help them, and why their lives will be better. If you don't have that in your elevator pitch or as the basis for describing what you do, then that's the drawing board you should be working on more so than recruitment at this time.
There's a group of professionals out there that do this better than anyone else that I have ever met as a group, so to speak. I don't know if I'm a fan of any of them, but politicians will give you that soundbite. You hear it time and time again. You'll catch a news story, a news clip, someone running for office, and they have this soundbite that doesn't go away. Every time they talk, every time they're mentioning something, every time they brings it back to this soundbite, and the soundbite carries more weight than anything other that they said, right?
Oh,
their followers,
absolutely.
their fans, the news media, Twitter, whatever it is going to have that soundbite, true or untrue. They're going to have that soundbite locked into their being. And if you talk with someone on either side of the aisle, especially if you're trying to argue with them, you're going to get that soundbite thrown back in your face because everyone has brought that into their being. And that's all it is. That is all a mission statement, vision statement. All this stuff is, it is a soundbite, and it's got to be catchy. It's got to make sense. It's got to be memorable. If it's none of those things, what do you even have?
So I think there's one more thing, though, that mission statement or that soundbite needs is an invitation, explicit or implicit, an invitation to carry on the conversation. The only decision I think someone's going to make on that elevator speech, the pitch, the mission statement is, do I want to learn more? And that's really a big part of it. Now, is it sexy enough, intriguing enough, challenging enough, whatever, to say, that's interesting, and there's your hook, right? And then you said, say, why do you think it's interesting? Or bring it to the tell me more. So then you can start, puking out all your statistics and all the great things you've gotten, all this other stuff, and, hopefully not chase them away. But really, so somewhere's built into that perfect little mission statement, that perfect little purpose statement, is that invitation to learn more.
Oh, absolutely. And it's got to make sense. I know we talked about this a little bit longer than we probably should have, but like when someone asked me, like Travis, like, what do you do with the nonprofit architect? I was like, well, you know how it seems like no matter how many donations a nonprofit gets, they just spend every month chasing after donations, and everyone can say yes, right? They understand that scenario.
Sure.
So you design a little scenario for them to understand. And then it follows up like our signature program, which creates the monthly recurring donations and the partnerships necessary for you to say no to more work and yes to more money. And it's simple, it's straightforward, and makes sense to everybody. The how and the why and the details, right? That's where people get hung up at. But anyone can take a little story like that, a little question like that, tell you that you have a program that solves that problem and roughly how you go about doing that. That's it. That's all you need to say. You've now covered whatever it is that you do. It makes sense and people can understand that.
Work less, more money. And for me, so the response that was bubbling up, as you said that is, that's BS. But that's okay because I'm still engaged, right?
Yeah, you can say
and however I choose to voice it, I was like, no way. it's still, the conversation is continuing. It's hard to
Right.
walk away from that stand and say, oh, well, that's nice. Right?
Well, most people in the nonprofit world have the same response. That's
Yeah.
garbage. That's BS. That's not how it works. That
Yeah.
is
Prove it.
how that's not how it works if you only ask for one-time donations every time you ask somebody for a donation.
Right.
Of course you disagree with me. And of course you're upset by my statement. You have this visceral reaction that I'm wrong because you've never done it that way. And there's not a chance. There's not a chance that I'm going to make any money, any headway, make waves, or build a tribe if I'm doing it the same way everyone else is doing it. So why would you even
Right.
pick me? Why would you go with the Travis method? You wouldn't.
It sounds like
Because
distinctiveness.
oh, it sounds like distinctiveness. Who knew?
Right.
Who knew? And there's people listening right now and they're like, I can't believe it. We made this huge pivot for COVID, but we're still trying to do everything the same way we've been doing it for the last 25 years. Those ways don't work anymore. People are
Right.
tired of hearing it. It's not making an impact and no one cares. They might write you a check today, but they're never going to talk about your mission. They're never going to care about you again unless you hound them enough to where they're going to have to answer your call to action directly, like, no, man, go away. We don't care. They've had this accepted method in the nonprofit world that people have been going on for the last 50 years. They're
Right.
tired of it. They're not interested. Like, why would I want to do it the same way? Like, how do I get involved? How do I get any kind of feels about this? Like, how do people know that what is this impact we're really making? And then I come out and say something like that. And even though someone like you says, oh, that's BS, you're like, well, now what the heck is Travis doing? Like, I want to know how he's doing this thing. But that's besides the point we're trying to get on here.
Yeah.
How do you know that what you're doing is actually making a difference? How do you know?
And really that's the heart of this. So again, when we think about that purpose statement, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we think about that critical element of how are their lives better, that's where that question, really kind of starts out. Okay. So when we say their lives are better, then we have to look outside, the immediate activities that you're thinking about bringing to them, the programs or services or whatever, and go to a more, if you pardon the consultant sounding word, more holistic look and say, what does it mean for their life to be better? So there's a couple of interesting sources that I go to for what I think of when I talk about, what does it mean for life to be better? And most of the references, well, they tie to two sources. There are the UN in wasn't that long ago, and it's still active. No, it was in the 2000s. Came up with the 17 sustainable goals. Okay, sustainable development goals. Now these are huge goals, initiatives, if you will, that speak to the global scale, or and particularly in parts of our world that are particularly beat up. Goals like no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, affordable and clean energy, industry, innovation, infrastructure, clean water and sanitation, gender equality, et cetera, et cetera. That's a place I look at, and UN's done some phenomenal work kind of defining what those look like. So we say, for your population, let's take a look at all these goals that are established at a global level. And I know you're just working, a 12 block area. Which of these resonate with you that we could, dig into and really scale back to what's reasonable for your resources, your energy level, the data you're able to gather, your capacity for data analysis and stuff like that. But I don't like, it's pointless for me to invent what it means, to have a good life, right? We've got plenty of examples of, at a global level, or bringing it down a little bit. In 1972, the Kingdom of Bhutan, the king, I don't remember his name, we've never been introduced, came up with this concept of gross national happiness. I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase before. So, all around the world, you look at the CIA fact book or whatever, and we collect GDP about every country, gross domestic production, as primarily an economic indicator. But that doesn't necessarily tell you a whole lot about the country. It tells you a lot about one particular aspect. GDP in the U.S. has been pretty healthy, growing steadily. Obviously, a contraction as COVID came through, and then even though we're working through COVID still, its GDP is restoring, but stuff like that. But we don't have an index, if you will, that captures our gross national happiness. But I think that's important. And then it's not strictly resident in Bhutan. I was looking just this morning. New Hampshire's got an initiative to, again, come up with their own version of gross national, Vermont, their own version of gross national happiness. They've got something called the genuine progress indicator, which I absolutely love. And it says, in general, so for for people in Vermont, or maybe just in Montpelier,
Vermont's a real state, Mark. You have to acknowledge them as a real state.
And sadly, I've been there and I've enjoyed it. And I'm embarrassed that I'm all over it. So anyways, in Maine, I'm just kidding. I know it's Vermont. So, this particular organization, is GNHUSA.org, Gross National Happiness USA. So this thing I'm looking at in Vermont talks about these indicators, some data points that you could gather, quantitative or qualitative, that fall into three broad sectors: social, economic, and environmental. So we'll just pick one and kind of look at a couple things in there. So in the social sector, let's say it might be useful to measure and understand things like automobile accidents, commuting time, services of highways and streets, so that infrastructure stuff, higher education, lost leisure time, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all things that we as humans experience individually, but more significantly, jointly, with our friends, with our family, with our community, with the small c, with our community, with the big C. So this really helps in terms of saying, all right, so how do we know their life is better? It's like, well, my efforts, the tiny little nonprofit that I run, they don't speak to all this. I don't speak to environmental stuff at all in there. That's not my goal for what I'm trying to do. But there is things in there that, like that lost leisure time. The folks I work with, I want them to learn to lead smarter, not harder, to some degree. How do we know we do that? It's like, well, they came back, they did more volunteer work. That's a plus thing. They are not burning up their leisure time doing grunt work or admin work or redoing somebody else's work and stuff like that. And, so the nice thing for me, consulting or working with organizations is we've got, tons of resources that say, what does it mean to help the whole person, to help the whole community? Let's pick the ones that are in our wheelhouse and drive to them. So I might not be able to make your life perfect through my nonprofit or through books by vets, but I can be a contributing factor because here are a couple areas that I can help you out. And something, I might be the only organization, I may be part of the only organization that's really focused on helping you with that thing, and thus helping our community. So that's where this stuff goes through. And it's one of the hairy things, one of the real challenges that we have to be aware of, though, is the passage of time, right? So I think I've dropped the phrase management control before. So you, as back in your day as a leader in books by vets, there's stuff that's really under your control. The inputs you take in, it's that's strictly under your control or your leadership team's control. It's like, we're going to take this in, we're going to recruit for this, we're going to ask for this money and stuff like that. Those are absolutely management activities. And then what you do with them, the outputs you create, it's like, this training class, this recruiting poster, and all this stuff. Again, you totally own that. The moment we put it out there and make it not just available, but put it in use by an individual or a group of individuals, you're losing that management control, right? So all the outside influences are starting to creep in, on that person or whoever you're serving,
Mhm.
as well as, don't forget, their own free choice to, participate fully, to not participate at all. All of that is starting to, you're starting to lose control. So you'd like to, so pretty close in, and we talked about this before, you get the outcomes, you can see the good usage of this, right? So that's
Mhm.
that first round of anecdotes. Now, do we remain connected with that person or with their organization or their family, their community with a small c, to start understanding the short and medium term effects where you can still see your direct contribution, right? You see, okay, I can still see where what we did, where this guy is, or this woman is genuinely leveraging the book that she probably would not have authored and published if we weren't engaged with that. So we can see she's doing some other good things, but we're not the only ones, right? Who have helped her on her path to to that better life. And then, and this is the crazy part about doing this societal consequences impact analysis, is that it's a little bit of a leap of faith that the stuff you did that helped them achieve those short and medium term good usage or the direct contribution to their medium term effects. Um, Once we start talking about the long term, it would be lovely to find that person 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and have them back as a speaker, right? And
Right.
tell their good story and tie it to yours. But by the time they're that far out there, um, there's been a ton of indirect effects. So stuff that you had nothing to do with. There's there's maybe some lingering still direct effects. You got them pointed in roughly the right direction, or you gave them one or two tools that they're still
Mhm.
using. So it's really understanding, unless you've got a ton of money to track an individual, and you see this, in big organizations will do a long-term anthropological type research, and we
Mhm.
will track this group of individuals, we'll track this tribe over time, to draw something like that. In the more typical nonprofit, mission-directed organization, that's a lot of it is good to know, and it's very important to use that for structuring the original purpose statement and thinking about the data you want to gather and the data that you'd have the capacity to analyze. And it certainly informs the activities you do that convert inputs into those lower level outputs. Um, but in terms of assessment, I think most organizations will have to come to an understanding that ultimately we are a contributor to that person's life improvement. We are not the sole owner of that. We didn't do this all by ourselves, right?
Mhm.
We might have done it all by ourselves to get them that book published, right? But what they did with that book, now it's starting to seep out of our control. That doesn't mean we don't measure it. It doesn't mean we don't care about it. It doesn't mean we don't use it to form our initial support plan. But we just know that at some point, the credit we're taking for it is shared with others.
That's without a doubt. I know when we were in Books by Vets, we had the three E's. We have encouragement, empathy, and entrepreneurship. Encouragement, because you have to, I don't care who you are, you need a little encouragement to get that book written. Empathy, actually listening to what's going on in the world. We might be the first person to actually listen to them without judgment with the story that they're telling.
Sure.
It's really a shame, right? That's not our hope that we're the first person to listen, but to actually be, engaged and empathy and what that means. And then entrepreneurship, because they have to go and encourage and sell these books. Like, we don't take a percentage of the sales. We didn't do any of that stuff. But having a book written doesn't really mean anything if no one reads it. Just like having a website means nothing if no one goes there, and having an organization that has an impact means nothing if no one knows who the heck you are.
Right.
But as you're working through this, and as you've got your mission statement with impact written, how you're actually tracking to see if you're making a difference. How do you know that what you're doing is meaningful and moving the needle, or if it's just convenient and you're just making motion, making it look like you're busy because everyone American has the need for whatever reason to feel busy, and busy is the badge of honor. Like, how do you know the difference between things that are meaningful and things that are just flapping in the wind?
Right. Um, so let me take you way back to physics 101. All right.
Newton's laws, is that what we're doing? The three laws of motion?
Probably. um, so one of the few things I remember from physics class is the definition of work.
Mm.
Work is force through a distance. So when you say, I've done a lot of hard work today, but I didn't get a damn thing done, actually, you've done zero work. Zero good work, zero bad work. You've done zero work because you didn't make a difference. Imagine pushing against a wall in your house with all your force. Don't use a sledgehammer. Just lean against it as hard as you can. I'll bet you that wall doesn't move. If it does, you need to find another house. But generally speaking, that wall's not going to move.
Usually
I
do
worked
that
all
on the
day.
walkthrough. Yeah.
Right.
Push all the walls on the walkthrough, see if it's worth
That's
buying.
right.
Yeah.
That won't look weird at all. So you can push on it all day long, but you've accomplished no work. You did not move the wall and you didn't move yourself. You've expended a lot of effort. So I think are you just, diddling around doing stuff, or have you accomplished something meaningful? You don't know that without the measures, right? Can you measure the distance you traveled or somebody else traveled as a result of your efforts, as a result of your activities? So, and again, it's all the stuff we've been, going through here is, yeah, it's nice to say I have a good feel about that. It's like, yeah, we provided all these beds, we provided all these needles, we found homes for, all these, three-legged dogs, all great. Um, and, I suppose it depends on your scope and your vision, where do you want to be, how much do you want to change the world? But even those things, have measures. They're easy measures, they're outputs, they're counts and stuff like that. But to say that you've genuinely made a difference means you have to be measuring the things that indicate difference, that change in status, that change in wealth, that change in self-confidence, speaking, to individuals, the change in the time that's available to them, the change in the time that they spend commuting to work, the change in the condition. So we have the Chesapeake Bay near where I live, the ability to raise oysters in there. I mean, we shut down for a long time due to pollution. It took the concerted efforts of a lot of governments and not NGOs, but government and non-for-profit organizations to turn that around. So how do we know we made a difference? It's like, I would eat an oyster out of Chesapeake Bay. 10 years ago, it would be illegal to do so, as well as incredibly foolish, right? So again, do you have that measurable result that I suppose maybe we could qualify that other people care about as much or more than you, right?
Right. And I think what you're kind of alluding to is something in the business world called KPIs, key performance indicators. Are we
Exactly.
doing these things? How many times are we doing it? Like right now, it is the 16th of March. I've put together this ultimate podcast guide that's been on the street since like the end of January, and I've sold a bunch of copies, and it's been great. But this week, I took out my first ad on Facebook trying to sell this thing to people that might not have heard of me yet. So like I've had all these people that have seen the ad. I've got all these people that have ended up on the landing page. It's a very small percentage. And currently at this very moment, I've had zero sales.
All
So
that effort, no work.
all that effort and no work, right? So, I'm running it for a week to see what's doing. I don't know. I've got some friends that'll check the copy and different things, but I'm going to try something different next week. I'm going to compare the two to see what it looks like. Is it a lack of brand name association to what might be produced or might be valuable to you? Is it the methodology or the copy that's ever written in the ad that's like, I don't know if I buy this, or I don't know if I'm interested in it, or why is this ad showing up for me? Maybe I've got the wrong target audience. Maybe I'm not talking to the right people. I don't know. But what I'm going to do is key performance indicators is people actually buying my product. If that stays zero, then I've got to change my approach. I've got to do something differently. I've got to make it to where the ad is going to reach the people that it needs to reach in order for them to take action on buying the podcast guide in this case. Maybe I rearrange it. Maybe I give away and direct them to the free download to collect the emails to get them interested in it. And then through a series of emails, I can get them over the hump. But the direct sale for me currently isn't working. So what does this look like in the nonprofit world? Maybe you're feeding the homeless. Maybe your goal is to feed 300 people every week. Well, maybe you're not reaching that number. And it might not be that you don't have enough money to do that, but maybe through coordination with another nonprofit, you're getting people actually off the streets. So it's not that you didn't reach your goal of feeding 300 people. Maybe there's not 300 people to feed. So
Right.
the fact that there's less people coming out because they've been homed is an indicator that you're doing well, or at least a part of the cog in the wheel that's doing well. So it might not be the ability to feed more people that's actually a good indicator. It's that there's less people needing your services. That's the actual
Right.
indicator.
Yeah. I think that's the ultimate measure of success for a nonprofit is that they shut their doors because they're not needed anymore.
Absolutely. But they don't think that way, right?
Right. Tell that to a founder.
Yeah. What, like,
Right.
like I do coaching and consultant services, and people are like, well, how are you keeping these people as lifetime clients? And I'm like, I don't want them as lifetime clients.
Right. What
And some
dismal
people in the
failure.
business, right? Some people in the consulting business are like, what do you mean? I don't want to, no offense, Mark, I'm going to use your name, but no offense, I don't want you calling me a year from now with problems and questions. In my opinion, that means I have not done my job. I have not got you to the place where you're informed, where the processes and procedures are in place, and what we've talked about is sustainable. I haven't
Right.
done my job as a consultant if you're calling me next year to figure out the same thing or something close. I think I failed you as a consultant, and you should revoke my imaginary license because I don't think there's anything as a certified nonprofit consultant out there. But
Right.
I mean, that's how I feel about it. People are like, "Oh
Yeah.
no, you've got to be able to sell them this, and you got to be able to sell them that, and get stuff."
Oh my gosh.
I
Right.
don't want repeat customers. I want brand evangelists, something that I've done so good at, that they're so proficient at, that they can't help but mention my name because I crushed it for them, and they don't need me anymore. That's what I want.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely track with that. I think on my LinkedIn profile, there's a little bit of what I do, and then or what it is I like to do, what it is I will do. I'll swoop in and help you with this stuff, and then I go away.
Well, that's
That
one of
to
the
me,
D's of leadership, right? 3 Ds of leadership are delegate, delegate, disappear. So you've got
right.
the disappear one down.
That's right. Only unfortunately, it's just a party of one. So delegation. I got my wife and two dogs, and I'm too smart to delegate to any of them.
Oh, that's good though. No, we talked about this is a great episode. Talked about creating purpose with impact, how to know if you're actually making a difference, and really determining the meaningful from the convenient, where we really define what work is, and that's force over distance. Doesn't matter if you're taking action if it doesn't actually move the needle forward. It doesn't actually move you across the finish line or closer to the finish line. So if you're not moving
I
towards
mean,
it, you're not
right,
doing any
right.
work.
Right. To be perfectly honest, if there's something you really enjoy doing and you really hate the idea of measuring it, and it's genuinely need based, my recommendation is, like stop being an organization unto yourself. Why don't you go find another organization that does similar work or works with that particular group you care about, and say, I would love to run this program underneath you. And maybe you can tap into whatever metrics and measurement system that they have in place, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. We love volunteers, we love cheap staff and stuff like that. And to be perfectly honest, and this time I talked with budding nonprofits, brand new ones, or folks who are thinking about it. One of the questions I always ask them is, would you be willing to do this if your name wasn't associated with it? And if they get any answer like, well, no, this is really important to me because my brother, or just it's in my heart, or stuff like that. It's like, something, you're in the wrong business if your name's got to be associated with it.
Yep, that's one of
Right.
it's one of the questions I
Right.
asked. Like, is it about you or is it about them? Is one of the
Right.
questions. And the other one I asked them, if I put $2,000 in your pocket today and it made a world of difference, I don't think you should be in the nonprofit world.
Right.
I mean, that tells me that your life is not in order.
Yeah.
that where that 2 grand in your pocket today is going to make a huge impact in your world, then I don't think you're ready for nonprofit work, because it's going to stretch you to the max. All your stuff in your personal world, in my opinion, has to be taken care of first
Right.
in order you have the
Absolutely.
space, the capacity, the energy to do what it takes to run a good nonprofit, especially to be a founder. Oh goodness, I don't know people that work harder at anything in their lives than nonprofit founders. Good Lord.
Uh-huh. Right. But
Good
that's,
Lord.
but and you're right. And that's what moves it from hobby to, which an internally focused hobby to something that, truly benefits others. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, Mark, why don't you tell people where they can get a hold of you at?
So even though I hang out with that tagline, the nonprofit troubleshooter, it would be nice if I had a URL that even remotely resembled that. So, so I'm at my starting point is at Lighthouse One Lighthouse One.com. That's where I run my consulting from. But you just search for Mark D. Bowers. D as in David, D as in somebody else, use Mark Bowers on LinkedIn. So you can find me there. Same thing on Twitter, same thing on Facebook. And I'm also, reachable through I mentioned I run a nonprofit. So it could be Mark at pdchr.org. We'll take you there. Trust me, I just got I only got one mail program, and it's got 5 different accounts. So one way or another, you'll find me.
That's perfect. Hey, Mark, thanks so much for coming on today,
Sure
dropping
thing.
some knowledge bombs. And go check out Mark and the Nonprofit Troubleshooter, or pdchr.org.
All right. Perfect. Thanks so much, Travis. I've enjoyed this opportunity.